Good evening, folks. Welcome to the Science Behind Wildlife Closures. Thank you guys for joining us here tonight. It's great to see friendly faces and some unfamiliar faces, but I'm glad you guys are all here to be part of the conversation about wildlife in our valley. Just kind of want to get started with some thank yous. Big shout out to High Five Media for coming here to film this, document this for posterity. We'll share it on our website. We're going to archive it. It's also going to be available as a resource to all of our panelists as well. I want to thank our panelists. We'll get to them and let them introduce themselves. A huge shout out to all of you guys. Thank you for being here and joining us. I also want to thank the Land Trust, Jess there at the back. Thank you for coming out and talking about conservation values and conservation easements with us. I also want to thank folks from Vail Club 50, Friends of the Eagle's Nest Wilderness, any elected officials that may be in the building tonight, because we really wanted to reach our hiking, biking, outdoor enthusiast demographic. So we're thrilled that you guys all took it upon yourselves to come out and join the conversation tonight. What we're going to kind of get into, I'm going to talk to you for 10, 15 minutes, give you kind of an overview of what we're going to get into tonight, and then we're going to kind of throw it to our panel. We've got some prepared questions. We're also going to take questions from you all. If you didn't get a chance to pre-submit them, you'll also have the opportunity to raise your hand, shout it out. I will be repeating your questions so I don't have to pass the microphone around so we capture that sound for video. Let's get right to it. Our panelists tonight, Mike with the Forest Service, Phil Kirkman from Eagle County Open Space, Craig Westcote from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and Michelle Wolf from Eagle County Adopt a Trail. I hope that you guys recognize these folks up here. They're part of our community. They're also our local experts. So I'm hoping that if they are unfamiliar faces tonight, they will become more and more familiar to you over the course of the conversation that we're having as a community, but also part of that conversation that we're having on public lands, having on trails, the conversation that we're having during these seasonal trail closures. So again, these folks are going to get a chance to introduce themselves to you in more depth, but here they are. So what we're gonna do tonight, my goals for the night, we want to understand what seasonal closures are, what are seasonal wildlife closures, what are trail closures. While doing that, I also want to provide you guys action-oriented solutions. We don't want to be up here saying, no, you can't go here, no, you can't do this. We want to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't go here, let's try this instead. So we really want to be action-oriented, think of the solutions rather than these closures as issues or problems. We also want to get that conversation started. Ultimately, how do we define wildlife? How do we value wildlife as a community? I like wildlife. I'm sure all of you folks like wildlife as well. That means something different to each and every one of us. So what I want part of this conversation to be about is really trying to articulate what we mean when we say we value wildlife. Are we willing to take steps X, Y, and Z to ensure certain things happen to our wildlife population? So I just want to kind of get those gears spinning in folks' heads. And then finally, we want to talk about how our presence affects wildlife. Do we think our presence affects wildlife? Yeah, it does. You're exactly right. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about how it affects it, and then maybe provide some of those solutions to how it could affect wildlife populations even less. Again, if you've got questions for the panelists, please feel free to visit our giant snifter glasses in the lobby. My colleague Izza over here also has paper, pencils. Raise your hand, she'll come over, and then deliver them to us up here at the panel. Anyone know what type of wildlife that is? It's a party beagle. A bunch of dogs got together, beagle was involved. This is Hamilton. This is my dog. What do you guys notice about those pictures? He is not on a leash. Does anybody recognize where these pictures were taken?
Where the pictures were taken?
And I'll give you a hint. That one on the right, actually the two big ones, I think it's by the most beautiful stream in Eagle County. Vail Pass, even more specific? Uneva Peak. So that's the ball. If you kind of see that ridgeline heading up there, that's the Uneva Peak ridgeline. This is that gorgeous meandering creek that's filled with pink primrose. We're going to be paintbrush of all colors there in the middle of the summer. What is Hamilton doing off leash? Peter, you're an environmental educator. You're an environmental steward. You should know better. Right?
He's having a ball.
He's having a ball. You are exactly right. Why I have this up here is I'm making a pledge to you guys tonight. I know that my dog off-leash affects wildlife. You will never see Hamilton on a trail without a leash on anymore. It's going to be my personal step that I'm going to take as an individual. Small pebble cast into an ocean. More and more people start to make those small changes, we will have effects. And so Hamilton is up there. You know, I told my wife that this was my big change for this season, and she said, ugh, summer fun is over. He's going to get his exercise. He'll be just fine. What I'm really concentrating on by sharing with you guys this, I want you to hold me accountable, and I want myself to hold myself accountable. So again, it's not something I'm challenging the audience to do. This is a personal pledge. If you happen to see Hamilton running around not on a leash, give me a call, because that means he's loose. So let's get into trail closures. It's a lot. It's a lot of trails up there. I mean, some of my favorites, Whiskey Creek, great one. You know, our hiking programs go there. We don't go there until the middle of the summer. Back towards Eagle, a lot of these are the bike trails. Why I've got this up here, it's a lot of different trails, a lot of different areas. And if you also look at the dates, they're not all the same. We've got different trails with different dates, closed at different times of the season. Why? Anyone want to take a guess? Why might that be?
Is this migration or births?
Different wildlife?
So all of the above. Those are great. So you know, different activities that the trails or that the places are closed for. Different types of wildlife. That's exactly right. So why I wanted to bring this to the forefront. It's changing. It's fluid. There are lots of things to be aware of. I've got on the front or on our little table out here a comprehensive list of all of the closures in our area. Please take one with you. Put it on the fridge. Keep it handy as you dust off the boots and get those bikes ready to hit the trails. It's going to be your one-stop shop for all of the closed trails in this area. So again, just to kind of highlight on a map, this is up valley on the Eagle Holy Cross District. This map was provided by Mike. So the red trails you see, these are the North Trail sections. Back here towards Whiskey Creek, red trails are closed. Here's a map of the West Avon Preserve provided by the Mountain Bike Association and Forest Service. Red mountain bike trails closed, yellow hiking trails open. Same area. Some trails closed, some trails open. Further down valley towards Eagle. Again, we've got a few open trails, some closed trails, some open trails that intersect with closed trails, some closed trails that intersect with open trails. Back towards Beaver Creek, the Stone Creek Trail closed. Evercrisp, the brand new one, with a seasonal closure on it through that Whiskey Creek portion. Anyone familiar with this seasonal closure? Where's this one? Highway 6 running through. Here's the Eagle River. This is the Eagle River Preserve. Eagle County open space, just west of the main intersection at Edwards. Huge wintering grounds for elk. You can see herds there. I don't know if they're there now, but in the past, we've seen them there regularly. So we've got lots of different parcels with lots of different trails in areas closed. Why? Anyone familiar with any climbers in the building? Anyone ever tried to climb on a cliff that has peregrine falcons nesting on it? There are seasonal closures for those climbing routes. How about caving? We don't go to caves all year long. There are seasonal closures for bats in different caves. Snake Road, anyone familiar with this? This is in the southeast. They close an entire road for snake migrations. There are so many snakes coming out of the woods, crossing the road, that they have closed the road down to let the reptiles cross the road. We close areas for different types of animals, different types of activities, different landscapes, different types of wildlife. So why? Why do we do it? Why are there seasonal closures? To put it pretty simply, it's wildlife need time, they need space, they need privacy. all of my imagery, most of my imagery, this little presentation, courtesy of Rick Spitzer. So we are most familiar with elk and deer closures. Well, a lot of the seasonal closures in this area are for those large ungulates. They need the same basic needs that we do: food, water, cover, and the ability to move from one habitat to the other. What that really is referring to is those migrational, those elevational gradient migration routes. When they come down the lower elevations as it gets colder and colder and the snow piles up, they'll move back up. So we need to think about keeping those migration routes open. And then it's also important to point out, every time we disturb wildlife, it's changing their physiology. They're doing something is happening inside of them that is changing the way their body is reacting. They're reacting to us. We may not see it, we may not be able to witness it, but there are physiological reactions occurring in that animal that we should be aware of. So foraging, this is very, very important. This is a lot of those south-facing hillsides close important forage for the wintering wildlife. They need to put on weight. We really need these animals to eat. 90% of their time, they need to be standing still. They need to be putting on weight, not moving, not being flushed by my Hamilton. There is energy put in to just standing up. This is a 600-800 pound animal potentially. Just to get up takes a lot of energy. Calving, another. These are kind of more towards our late season closures. Animals are giving birth. Lactation takes tons and tons of energy. We need to give mothers plenty of time, space to acquire that energy that is going to in turn allow them to feed their young. So this is moving into the early summer. Young animals are not able to run away. They're pretty much at the mercy of their mothers and of other people, humans, animals out there sharing their habitat. So it's kind of our overview of wildlife closures, kind of the why behind why we do it, why there are seasonal closures. At this point, I'm going to take a seat, but I want to introduce again Mike Beach with the U.S. Forest Service, Eagle Holy Cross District. He's going to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the human pressures or what they're seeing on the trails and in the backcountry. Mike.
Sure. Thanks, Pete. Mike Beach. I'm the Wilderness and Trails Manager for the Eagle Holy Cross Ranger District. We're based out of Minturn. Our district spans from Vail Pass to Glenwood Canyon and from Tennessee Pass up to Sheephorn Country and Flat Top. So it's about 700,000 acres of land that we, public land that we manage, and about 200,000 of that is within wilderness areas. On our district, we have about 615 miles of trail, excluding trails within the ski area, and about 200 of those miles are within wilderness as well. So as kind of the basis for the conversation, I just wanted to talk a little bit about trends that we've seen, recreationally speaking. Some of these are anecdotal, which I'll reference, but a lot of them are kind of driven by data that we've collected over the years. So with regards to just use forest-wide, again, we're in the White River National Forest. In 2012, you had over 15 million visitors visit our forest. A lot of those are ski area visits, but even without the ski areas, we're still the most visited national forest in the country, kind of by far. So a lot of people coming here. We have a new visitor use data set out, but it's not been finalized yet, but we're kind of expecting a pretty significant increase in use over that 15 million. On the trail, we put out trail counters regularly, kind of spread them out across our district. So in 2010, we had a kind of a good set of trail counter data, and then we had one from last year. And the increase kind of varied, so between 25% increase and 300% increase on our trails. And that runs the gamut. We see trails that have a couple hundred people a year, and then we see trails, Hanging Lake's a different story, I'll exclude that, but up to 30,000 people a year on a trail like Booth Lake. So we really run the gamut of what we're seeing out there. On average, I think we're seeing about twice as much use on our trails as we did in 2009. So twice as much use in 10 years is a pretty significant increase, especially based on how much we were seeing in 2009. Within wilderness, we've got a pretty good data set for the Holy Cross Wilderness on overnight use. And kind of a similar story, we're seeing about a 30% increase in overnight use in the Holy Cross Wilderness since 2009, and then we started collecting data in 2003, and since then it's increased by about 100%, so twice as much use in the area. And just to kind of compare, since about 2009, there's been about a 5% increase in population in Eagle County. So kind of anecdotally, what that tells me is people are coming from elsewhere to recreate here, which we all know, and then people that live here are also getting out more. So those are kind of the two anecdotal things that I see from that data. Just a couple other things as far as trends. We kind of have these hot spots. I mentioned Hanging Lake, Booth Lake, Mount of the Holy Cross. These are kind of areas that are getting a lot of attention on social media, online, in magazines, all sorts of different types of media, and they're drawing a ton of people. I mentioned Booth Lake, 30,000 people. It's not really an anomaly as far as the other trails that we have in our district. And a couple other points, and then I'll wrap up. Another thing we're seeing is more people going further, especially in the wintertime, and I think that has to do a lot with technology. You know, you have skis now that are alpine touring skis that weigh about as much as my Nordic skis do, timber sleds, increased technology in snowmobiles, so people are able to get out there quicker, faster, go further, and they're doing that. And then finally, I think this kind of mirrors a trend that we're seeing across the county, but we don't really have much of an off-season anymore. On our trails, obviously, summer is the highest percentage of use, but with all the people that are coming up here for events and just to visit, the trails are seeing more use year-round, a lot more than they did in the past. So those are kind of a couple of the trends that we've been seeing on our trail system. And obviously, we know that people out there have an impact on wildlife. It's one of the things that's definitely impacting them. So more people is probably equal to more impact.
Thanks, Mike. So we're kind of setting the stage, you know. So we've set the stage with lots and lots of people in the backcountry. Next, I want to introduce Craig Westcote with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, a wildlife manager. Introduce himself and then kind of talk. You know, you can start to touch on kind of the effects that all of the folks that Mike was talking about are having on the wildlife in the backcountry.
Thanks, appreciate that. I am Craig Westcote, as he said. I've been here in the valley since 1983. I've seen a few changes happen, and I've been, well, not right at this location at this table, but I've been around the valley, maintaining the same district for well over 20 years. And kind of, I think what I want to stress is, with all mammals, it really doesn't matter. Their two basic functions in life are survival and propagation. I mean, that's just what they want to do. They want to make it through and then have as many offspring as they can possibly have. So we put these winter closures on because past research has shown us that we lose the most number of animals through the winter months. And it kind of makes sense. Food's not available, temperatures are bad, conditions just don't really stack up in favor of mammals over the winter, or most mammals. So originally, we put the winter closures in just to increase survival. And we went through a really fairly detailed process on how those dates were established. And the process basically came down to, well, how long is winter in Eagle County? And that's a really silly question because it varies a lot from Dot Cerro to the top of Vail Pass. And then it came down to, well, how long do we really need to protect these animals to get them through the winters? And it was a kind of a compromise, and it was a political compromise because we didn't want to take too much time away from everybody else that's here trying to enjoy the outdoors. So we came up with basically this 4-month closure. For everybody that's lived around here, April 16th isn't always the magic day that all the snow is gone and everything greens up and everything's hunky-dory and, you know, there's not any chance of erosion or anything else if we go out there. But that's the date we decided we're going to try. So with all that being said, April 16th rolls around and people have cabin fever. You know, we basically told them, you can't go out there. As soon as that closure comes off, basically everybody wants to go where they haven't been able to go for the last 4 months. And disturbance, any kind of human disturbance has an impact on the animals. And what we need to remember is just our presence. I mean, just seeing our silhouette out there has a fairly large impact on animals. They've evolved to see us as a high-level predator, and almost every one of them flees from us. Deer, you know, everybody's going to say, well, I have deer in my yard, and I have elk in my yard, and they don't flee from me. Well, animals also kind of have this little Fitbit computer in their head that basically counts calories and expenditure of energy. And if them being in your yard or being close to you, if they can gain more nutrition by eating your trees and everything else that you've fertilized and are so nice to provide for them, more than they would get from running away from you, they tolerate us. So they're changing the behavior for a little while to tolerate us. If they change it too much and become habituated, all of a sudden that territory becomes theirs, and when you walk out the front door, a cow elk stomps on you, and we don't want that either. So we're trying to figure things out. We've looked at all sorts of things, and with disturbance, there's probably, if you Google human disturbance in wildlife, there's 300 or 400 research studies out there. And kind of some things that really stand out to me is some of it's kind of counterintuitive. You look at disturbance and you think, well, those darn motorcycles and snowmobilers cause a lot more harm than I do out there just walking around. So we did a study on that. And it finds out that cross-country skiers have a larger impact on deer and elk than a snowmobile. So we go to more studies because we're figuring out we're really not as bright as we thought we were, and we shouldn't be thinking things. So there's been research studies done on almost every type of activity to be done. And what we find out is from walking to horseback to mountain bikes to ATVs, horseback and walking have a slightly smaller effect, or animals flee at a slightly less distance than they do from the other two activities, but they're still fleeing at nearly a half a mile. When they see us, elk flee from us on horseback or walking at nearly a half a mile, or at least that's what this research study shows. Mountain bikes and ATVs, I would have guessed ATVs have more an impact. They're louder, they're doing everything else. It shows almost the exact same impact. And those elk, at least at this study, started fleeing at a distance of 1 mile when they realized a mountain bike or an ATV were out there. And the weird thing with elk are, you know, we all pretty good biologists, and we realize elk are bigger than deer. They run until they can run no further. This study was done in a fenced-in area, and these elk actually started at a distance of 1 mile and ran until they hit a fence. So they just don't stop. Their idea is survival, get away from that predator, and they just go and go and go. Mule deer have a totally different behavior. They stand there and hope you don't see them. You see them and go, oh God, I hope they don't see me. But their heart rate goes up just like they're running full blast. The chemicals in their body go up just like they're running full blast. They release all sorts of stuff that is not good for them. It's the flight response, only they don't flee. So we're seeing different responses from different species, but the impact are they're using up these vast amounts of calories. They're burning energy. They're not, for every time they're out there and they don't have the chance to feed, cessation from feeding it's called, they're losing the game. They have to, every chance they get, a deer has to, if it's forage available and they can feed, they need to eat to survive. They don't have the big fat reserves like elk do that can get them through a lot of the winter. They're smaller animals. They have to continue eating through the winter. We're talking about closures and different dates, and you guys brought up like movement. That's a good one because the closure up at Green Gate on top of up on top of Red Hill was made for sheep movement and for elk and deer movement. So the dates are really crazy. You don't get to go up there till July 15th because that's when they're done doing their thing. When you look at a lot of these other closures like Vail back bowls, That was a progressive closure. That one was based on the Vail elk study that was done in the 80s and 90s. Found out there's a lot of elk going back there to calve. It was the first elk calving closure in the state of Colorado. So you're looking at areas that some progressive management has been done. We kind of really in a bind because we really don't know what more we can do. These animals, the populations right now, both our elk and deer herds, are on a fairly steep decline. And we're trying to figure out what the public will tolerate, what the real importance of wildlife is to the public. I mean, maybe I'm a very biased example. I think wildlife is really important, but maybe it isn't that important. Maybe recreation is more important, and if we ask, well, what if we close other areas all the way till July 1st? Maybe that's asking too much, and I think that's got to be a decision that's made on a community level. We're looking at doing some things like adaptive management, and the reason we don't do so much adaptive management where we go, well, down in Dotsero, April 16th is an all right date because it's pretty open, but if you're on top of Shrine Pass, you know, you're going to be in snow up to your eyeballs still probably. So maybe we should be looking at keeping that closed till June 15th. The reason we didn't do that is basically because of the KISS principle. You know, keep it simple, stupid. We want people to understand that almost everything has the same dates and they can depend on these closures being the same pretty much throughout the valley. And while that's really good for getting compliance, it's not always the best management practice. So I guess we also need to come to the public and say, what would you think of a more adaptive management plan where some areas open early, some areas open a little later, we're keeping things, it gets so complex it's difficult to understand, but maybe that's what we want to do. Somebody was talking about closures on things like bats, and bats are kind of cool, and the reason those closures are in effect because we're spreading disease. There's a white nose syndrome out there that basically can devastate entire bat communities, and they don't want people going in those caves and then coming out and spreading it to a different cave. So we have all sorts of reasons we do these managements, and sometimes I think what we really lack is getting that information out to the public and making it understood. And then they look at us like, why are you taking this away from us? Sometimes we do have good reasons, and sometimes not so good. So I guess kind of what I want to leave it at is, you know, it's kind of a catch-22. We live here, we all moved here. Almost everybody in this room, I'm sure, is an avid outdoor enthusiast. I mean, let's face it, we're paying a high price to be up here for the beauty, for the outdoors. We've seen this increase in local population. We just heard this is the most heavily visited national forest in the country. What we're doing is running out of space. We have a lot of people using the outdoors, and there's hardly any place left for the animals to go where there aren't people. And one of the main components that's kind of not understood is animals need, at least the large ungulates, need solitude. They need areas where they can just plain get away from people. And so we're probably going to come forward and ask, would you be willing to not go into certain areas if we opened up other areas for you to use at the same time? We need to be progressive. We need to figure this out, but we need to figure it out as a community because maybe wildlife isn't the highest priority. Although in a recent survey, it did come in number one. So I think what I'm saying is the closures we have in place, we need to make sure that they're valid. If the animals are no longer using those, we should keep the closures on there. Some of the other ones we have to have some more flexibility and maybe keep the dates closed longer, maybe all the way to July 1 when those calves and fawns can actually get up and run away from people that are in the area. And I think we need to have the flexibility almost to do that on an annual basis because these animals are changing their behaviors to try to adapt to what's happening out in the outdoors. So I don't have any answers, and I'm really looking for input because right now the winter closures do a lot of good, but they aren't the ultimate answer.
Are hunting dates hard and fast?
Hunting dates, they're being discussed right now, but yes, pretty much. And hunting is the Colorado Parks and Wildlife's only management tool. You will not find a more conservative management strategy starting last year in the state than is happening in this area. We just adopted a new set of regulations that basically you always control the number of animals you have by hunting the female population. There is no hunting the female population this year. So that's pretty progressive for a state agency.
Thank you, Craig. And I just want to point out, Craig raised some really good questions to the community, to you folks. What, again, back to that, how do we value wildlife? What are we willing, maybe to compromise on? And so again, I think we can get into that later in discussion, but I think that's kind of where we want this discussion to go, is kind of be thinking what we are willing to do to, make life easier for our local wildlife. So next up, I've got Phil Kirkman with Eagle County Open Space. He's the natural resource specialist and ranger. Phil's going to introduce himself and maybe speak to more localized efforts, what's going on at the county level.
Sure. So I'm Phil Kirkman. I work for Eagle County in their open space department. We have a handful of parcels throughout Eagle County. Most people are more familiar with the Edwards properties that we manage, that we own and manage. That's going to be the Eagle River Preserve, Homestead L open space, and then also Miller Ranch open space that goes right along the river there. Those are kind of our three what I call mountain parks. There's quite a few more parcels that we have in the county that we just acquired a 1,500 acre ranch south of Eagle that we just finished the management planning on, and we're trying to get opened up to the public this summer. Which will have wildlife closures. The two main properties that we have wildlife closures on are the Eagle River Preserve and Brush Creek Valley Ranch that I was just talking about that we're going to be opening up. We have other properties, like I said, all over the county. We have some year-round closures where they're closed to the public and they're managed for wildlife. So the Horn Ranch that everybody drives through in the Red Canyon there, the upper part of that parcel is kind of dedicated to wildlife management. We also, at Miller Ranch, the other side of the railroad tracks, between the railroad tracks and I-70, is set apart for no public access. So one of the things that we're able to do as a county agency is have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to our management planning. For the Brush Creek Valley Ranch, we had 2 or 3 different times for the public to come and comment on the management of that property, and wildlife was definitely one of the biggest pieces of that. That flexibility, we've also funded properties that we don't own, but do have seasonal closures. Abrams Gulch in Eagle, and just so everybody's clear, Mr. John State with the town of Eagle manages all of the mountain bike access pieces for the town of Eagle you may be familiar with. If you guys have questions, I can hopefully answer those, or Craig's very familiar with those as well. But we have funded properties like Abrams Gulch and transferred those to the town of Eagle, or the Avon Preserve was another one, has a seasonal wildlife closure, and we are able to leverage some of those things as the main funder of a lot of those properties. When it comes to wildlife closures and what the property is going to be used, what the wildlife values are, we usually have a meeting with these guys. That's one of our earliest meetings that we have is what do you guys see in terms of wildlife, and what would you expect as a government agency that we're looking out for? So we really do take guidance and look at the science behind wildlife management on our properties from CPW. The challenges that we're seeing right now, a couple of the pictures that we have of some elk at the Eagle River Preserve, we had certain years we've had quite a few, certain years we haven't. We started doing a closure there in 2015 at the request of CPW. That herd last year we didn't see at all, and this year has been pretty limited, more early season. And we have seen reductions at Miller Ranch. We used to have a small herd that would hang out over there. We unfortunately have had one of our other biggest challenges are dogs. It's not just people respecting those closures. We have dog interactions that send elk onto the highway, or we have interactions where elk have to be put down. And so we have done things like expanded our closure at the Eagle River Preserve over the last 2 years in an attempt to create a bigger buffer zone. But really with looking at some of these properties as more of a mountain park than what somebody might think of an actual nature preserve is to start to recognize the amount of use that's going on. I think we kind of mirror in a local way what the Forest Service is experiencing in terms of use. Eagle County isn't getting any smaller. So when I started 5 years ago, we didn't have quite the, I would say maybe not concerns, but quite the traffic to create the concerns that we have now with wildlife management on our properties. The kind of future that we look at in terms of the county open space, luckily I think we probably had a couple votes in this room that got us extended. Thank you to all of you who came out and supported us. But looking into the future, you know, wildlife, as Craig said, part of the polling and the survey data from the county, wildlife was in, I think it ranked #1 with recreation following as #2 in terms of values for our community and specifically for open space. So 2 very weighty, high up there that took the majority of the response, but obviously have some conflict at times and can be competing interests. So it's going to be a continued challenge for us as we go forward and are looking at acquisitions or different management, something that we're really going to have to take into consideration and looking at possibilities with adaptive management, but also, to Craig's point, what the community is expecting in terms of their open space dollars going towards different projects.
Thanks, Phil. I think, you know, Phil and I were chatting just the other day, and I just want to make sure everyone realizes how amazing it is that our Eagle County has an open space department. You know, growing up in Oklahoma, in Cleveland County, Norman, Oklahoma, we don't have that, just doesn't exist. And so, you know, it's tends to be a Colorado kind of specialty, but, you know, it's just, we are very fortunate to have not only an open space department, but a funded open space department that is able to, you know, acquire and then also manage those properties. So last but certainly not least, we've kind of set the stage. We've got lots of people in the backcountry. We've got closures. We've got this kind of intersection, human-wildlife intersection. I want to introduce finally Michelle Wolf. Michelle is with the Eagle County Trail Ambassadors and Eagle County Adopt a Trail, and it is a, you know, grassroots citizen-based organization that goes out there and does exactly what we're talking about, that helps enforce and educate on those wildlife closures.
Thanks, Peter. My name is Michelle Wolf with Eagle County Adopt a Trail, and the Adopt a Trail program came about a few years ago. VVMTA, which is Vail Mountain Trails Alliance, which was formerly Vail Valley Mountain Bike Association, created this program back in 2016. And it was more geared back then towards the care and maintenance of our local trails. And last year, in the beginning of the year, January 2018, we realized that there was more of an interest in the protection of our wildlife on the trails that we were helping maintain. And specifically the Evercrisp Trail. If you guys have heard about this, we have a trail that was developed between Eagle, Vail, and also Minturn. So it stretches across there. And throughout the summer, people saw this being built. And so many people, I can't tell you, that we're so excited about. They're like, oh, another trail to snowshoe on. And we're like, no. You need to know that it's closed in the winter. And so it was something that we knew that we needed to enforce back then. And it's really a program, like I said, that was just started last spring, but it's taken off. We have 25 volunteers that we call trail ambassadors. And these are people, like pictured here, that are volunteers. They sit at the trailheads and just remind people that they're closed and why they're closed. And I think I'm the perfect example of, like, sort of what our general community member was. I moved here. I recreate a lot, I bike a lot. In the beginning, I wanted trails, and now I've learned that there's such a balance between the wildlife and the trails that we have to care for that. And I think the key to making this succeed, or making our wildlife sustainable for the future, is just education. If we can get people to know and understand, then we're going to be doing a world of good. And so that's what our program does. We have a training in April for people who want to participate. Any volunteer time is welcome. It doesn't have to be, we have a suggested amount of time, but if you're going to go out there a couple of days a year, we will take you. You know, we like to make you a little more formal. We'll give you a little bit of an education. We'll also give you a vest to wear. We ask you to record stats, like how many people you saw, how many dogs. We just last week passed the 1,000 mark, which I'm super, I haven't told anyone this, but as of last week, we've interacted with 1,015 people in the community. So we are having an impact, and it's a small group of people, but it's definitely making a difference, in my opinion. And if after the program you're interested in finding out more, please visit me at the back or give me your email, and I'd be happy to give you guys some more information about it.
Thank you, Michelle. Again, I signed up to be a trail ambassador. It's very, like she mentioned, it's very simple, straightforward, but I think incredibly meaningful. And again, it's another group of concerned community members that are willing to take that step, go the extra mile, and not only learn, but then also help share that education knowledge with everybody else. So thank you all for introducing yourselves. At this point, we've got some prepared questions, but I also want to open it up. Do we have anything from the audience? Any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
Are there any closures to benefit the bighorn sheep?
So the question was, are there currently closures in place to affect or protect bighorn sheep?
There's not, on Forest Service land, there's nothing directly for bighorn sheep. Some of the other closures do benefit them, but yeah.
The bighorn sheep, the Green Gate Trail that I talked about down up on Cottonwood Pass and on Red Hill, the closure actually extends over to the Basalt Mountain side, and that is protecting the sheep on that side, and that was primarily why the closure was put in place and the dates that are in place.
So we talked a little bit about wildlife values and about the action that goes into closing these trails. So I don't know if you guys can talk about how are the dates, parcels, and restricted activities when it comes to trail closures. How do we kind of settle on which area is going to be restricted, what activity is going to be restricted, and when?
Why are you looking at me?
Well, I can say
Yeah.
for Eagle County's properties, we have a little bit more flexibility in terms of, we look for public feedback for different activities during our management process. The planning process for the Brush Creek Valley Ranch, we got a lot of requests for certain areas to be equine and pedestrian friendly with no mountain bike access, and that's something we were able to accommodate in the management plan. Some of the areas that we have, when CPW said we have some calving going on here, this would be a really good place to be able to go until beginning of July. We put that out there, and the community received it pretty well with the educational piece, and so we've been able to not just have kind of that traditional till April 15th closure, but go that extra bit. One of the other activities that I think is just unique to county property, and I think it kind of falls into how many of our properties have conservation easements, which restrict or help put some bumpers in terms of use. Really all of our properties don't have any motorized use. We did help fund the conservation easement areas around Dry Lake, outside of Gypsum, that actually hosts a motocross area in an attempt to concentrate use. But again, that's town of Gypsum, but something that Eagle County is part of the management team of. And then one of the activities that I'm sure will come up here with the shed hunting side of things, again, we don't allow the removal of rocks, trees, fungus, really any sort of resource off of open space properties. So one of those decisions to try to keep that resource on the properties, we don't allow shed hunting. We also know that's not going to lend itself to some of the disturbance that other properties see in terms of human activity.
from the Forest Service side of things, a lot of our locations and dates come from our forest plan. And within that forest plan, we have management areas set out. So it's basically like a zoning map for the forest. Some of those are kind of more for logging, timber cutting, some are for recreation, ski areas, but there also are management areas for wildlife. And within the forest plan, we have standards and guidelines that kind of set the dates for those closures. And the forest plan's from 2002, so it's somewhat dated, but kind of in the realm we live in. We're looking at a 20-year period where that's valid. And so that's kind of where our dates come from. We've adjusted them a little bit. Like Craig said, a lot of it is a balance. So it's kind of between wildlife and what's politically palatable for the community as well. So that's kind of how we've come to the dates that we've come to. And I will make a point, down in Eagle, there's winter closures December through about April. In the Vail area and up in Eagle Vale, we have winter and spring closures. So through that June 15th, June 20th date, up till July 1st for some of those.
And as far as what activities or what kind of keys us in on what closure areas we suggest, you look kind of at the keystone species, and the keystone species for, at least for us, are things like bald eagles, peregrines, and deer and elk, to tell you the truth. And deer and elk are fairly good because if it's good for deer and elk, it's good for a variety of mammals, small mammals, birds, everything else. Basically, what we're told in the textbooks were that elk go up to calve in the last weeks of May, first weeks of June, that they all went to 8,000 to 9,000 feet in an aspen stand close to water. What we're seeing is these swings in behavior of these animals. At least down valley where things open April 15th, people get up and they have a tendency to go kind of up to the snow line, which is sometimes right around 8,000 or 9,000 feet in May and early June. And what we've seen, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, is this shift where animals' behavior is changing. For the first time ever that I can remember, we saw elk calve along Brush Creek at about 7,000 feet on this open space property. So when I was saying we have to have adaptive management, I think we have to adapt to how the animals are adapting to us. And to make it work, it's going to get confusing for when the closures are when the closures are. If you're looking at something like a bald eagle, the general rule of thumb is the bigger the bird, the longer it takes to have an egg and get it to fledge. So you're looking at basically closures or buffer zones where you don't have activity within a half a mile of the nest from the middle of March all the way into the beginning of July. So we need to do a better job of explaining why the closures are there, and we're just going to have to make it a lot more complex if we really want to accomplish protecting the wildlife.
And I think, just to bring up kind of something that Craig mentioned earlier, how long is the winter in Eagle County? 20, 30 years ago, it was different. It's not going to get longer. From here on out, the winters are going to continue to be dynamic and change. And so I think kind of having that flexibility is quite important. So, along the same lines as that kind of other question, what do you guys think are the major roadblocks to getting more folks to abide by seasonal wildlife closures?
Oh, I think for a while it was probably us. If you've been here a while, we've had not the best signage out there on our seasonal closures until last year. We had an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that was laminated and partially ripped usually. But this about a year and a half ago, we started putting in gates. The town of Vail helped us purchase some gates, which was great, and some bigger signage with more of an explanation of why the trails were closed. And it's helped. We have some data from the North Trail. So in 2017, before gates and signs were put up, we had almost 190 people on one section of the trail in a week, so that's about 27 people a day. The following year with the gates and the new signage, it was 44 people in 2 months, which is obviously still a little bit more, but that's less than one person per day. So big improvements just from kind of doing things on our end. And then I think other people probably hit on this too, but we mentioned a lack of education. I think for the Forest Service, it's kind of this idea of public land is for the public. You know, taxpayers pay into this. We should be able to use it. But I think there's maybe a lack of understanding that we manage for more than one resource. It's not only for humans. We manage for wildlife, minerals, you know, all sorts of things. So trying to get that into people's heads is sometimes tricky. And I'll let other people hit on some other ones.
I was just going to add, it must be a big, I would think the Booth Creek Trail would be a big problem if 30,000 people are on that. In a season, you're saying? In a season?
It's over the course of a year, yeah, just
Over
under
the course of a year.
30,000. So between,
And I live at the base of it, and there's all kinds of different problems emanating from that too. For example, in our cul-de-sac, because the GPS that tells you how to get to the trailhead was screwed up, and then it was supposedly corrected, but really wasn't very well corrected, we got people going round and round all day long. We spent saying, no, we go out here, take the next one. And then, of course, was the parking, you know about that problem. So is anything being done to address that this spring? And is that trail ever closed? Is it ever closed to repair, to give itself a chance?
it's not ever closed at this point. And we are working with the town of Vail. We missed the meeting that occurred because we were furloughed, but the parking lot's on town property, and the trail starts on town property, then goes into forest. So we're working with them to try to start coming up with solutions to some of those issues. In the past year, we've tried to educate hotel concierges and some other places that are sending everyone to Booth Creek on that, and try to disperse use a little bit. So
We always tell people
It's about as busy as I-70 right now.
yeah.
And we always suggest some of the other trails that are in the Eastville area that are just so beautiful, and probably they'd find parking there, and so just more education, I think.
Definitely, and using Booth Falls, as a great contextual example. Imagine those 30,000. What's it going to take for those 30,000 folks to get this message that we're trying to share tonight? That maybe it would be better if their impacts were on a different trail. So that's kind of what we want to start getting people thinking about. So you guys don't have to.
We need ambassadors there.
Sit out in front, in your cul-de-sac. So any other folks up here want to kind of touch on the roadblocks to getting people to abide by these seasonal closures, or to think about their impacts in the context of wildlife values?
So every contact that I've had in a closure ends up falling into just a couple categories. Somebody either has no idea that there was a closure, they were enjoying the scenery, they didn't see the signs from last year, whatever it is. So they just truly don't know. The other folks know, and when you ask, do you realize, they're either very embarrassed because they knew better and they got caught. That might mean they're also very angry about it, that they got caught. But then you have a small percentage that they know and they don't care. And that small percentage is where education stops. And people like Craig, myself, local law enforcement, Forest Service law enforcement, that's why those positions exist. But really, it's only for a small percentage of people that go, or in my experience that I've seen in closures. We have properties over on the basalt side. Eagle County is funded and actually owns some properties over there. Picken County Open Space manages those for us. I've worked with them quite a bit over there, and those contacts end up being just about the same. They have some very similar wildlife closures over there. Getting people to change their habits, even with the education. I've been walking this trail for 20 years. Well, a lot of things have changed in 20 years, as Craig talked about, specifically with wildlife or why there are new signs up. I can speak for, we have expanded our our closures in an effort to respond to the amount of people and some of the dog contacts that we've had. I know Town of Eagle has added gates this year and increased some signage. So I know when you're down in the Town of Eagle, they've got a little bit better barrier system to try and get people to stop and say, hey, this is right in front of you, you're going to have to hop the gate at this point. I really think the Adopt the Trail program is kind of where a lot of the education, and when you look at more mature open space outfits across the Front Range, Boulder County being one of the oldest ones out there, Larimer County, they have these citizen ambassadors that make a big difference. And I think that the social pressure, because the majority of us, once we learn something, we act on it, but I really think that social pressure, when there are fishermen in a closed area at Miller Ranch, it's great when I have other fishermen heckle them and tell them to get out of there. That reduces what I need to do, which is great. But it also really comes from a peer, which instead of having somebody with a uniform on, I think in a lot of ways, for that 90% of people, really makes a difference out there.
I think another roadblock is just the seasonal condition. If we have an early spring or it's a really warm early summer, people see that the trails are dry. Bikers especially, they'll get out there and try to get on the dirt. But in the defense of what's happened with the U.S. Forest Service and their signage, it's unbelievable. Like Mike said, it used to be little laminated sheets that were on. It was so easy to just fly by these little notes on the trail, but now you can't really see the gate in the top corner of that, but these giant gates, people literally have to crawl over them or go way off the trail to get around them. The U.S. Forest Service has done an amazing thing with helping stop people who are on their own. And like I said, if we can just educate these people and help them understand why it's closed and why, even though the condition might be perfect for going on a hike or a bike ride, that you still need to respect it, is going to be priceless.
You're looking at the biggest roadblock for CPW. I think we developed the biggest antagonistic kind of component between the user groups that are really out there, because we came in and every public meeting I've ever gone to that a new trail is proposed, I'm the one that stands up and says, no, 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 wildlife will be harmed. And then we've done a very poor job of trying to mend any fences or communicate with these user groups. I think we made a huge leap forward actually due to the town of Vail last year and the wildlife forum. And all of a sudden, wildlife became a little more easy to talk about between the user groups and a knucklehead like me. And I think we've been our own worst enemy, to tell you the truth. And we're trying to figure out a way to repair that. I don't think we've even come close to doing that yet, but we're working at it. I also want to say that the Adopt a Trail program and having peers out there, it's made a huge difference in a lot of areas. So I hope they continue, and I hope everyone in this room signs up.
So I just want to add in a couple things. You know, I think Phil brought up a really interesting point about social pressures. You know what? It's nice when Craig with his badge, is out there and people are going to look at Craig and they're going to listen to him. But I think that the idea of social, the idea of social pressure is one that we can all kind of take home with us. And we did get a question here: do you have any suggestions for how to approach other trail users who are breaking the rules? I think that kind of gets to that social, we're not going to advocate for any kind of public shaming, putting their pictures on Facebook, whatnot, but,
I think one of the biggest ones is what we've tried to do with our winter outreach materials this winter is to say you're one of many visitors. And just hearing the Forest Service numbers, that's something that we unfortunately don't have, is some metrics to track our use over time. But when you can talk to somebody and say you're really one of many people that are coming out here, and if everybody thinks it's just me, I'm the only one who goes down to the river this way, I'm the only one who leaves my dog off leash in this area and lets him run into the closure. Trying to get that mentality of everybody's the only one. So all 30 people that went through this week, all thought they were the only person. So in terms of what you can say to someone, I really think is to get them to try to understand we don't have probably the same trail counts as they have up in Meeker for the Forest Service. This is a popular area, and to really try to, for your local crowd, trying to talk to them that our experience counts just as much as the people that come and visit. And that just because you're local, it doesn't mean that you don't make the same impact as the person from the Front Range coming out here. It's a lot of people.
And I want to just add to that, I almost think we have an added responsibility to be the models of good behavior out here. I mean, we live here, we care about this stuff. We should be the ultimate stewards. And so I think, in that context of, say a Front Range visitor hiking alongside us, we should take that responsibility upon ourselves to model the best type of behavior, to do what we know will support, our local wildlife populations or trail conditions, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I would add, I think coming here is a good start, and just educating yourselves on the reasoning behind these closures is really important, so you can explain it to other people. We call it the authority of the resource. If you sign up for the ambassador program, you'll hear about it from us at the training. But basically, it's talking to people. It's not that they're breaking a rule. It's more about what the effects are of them breaking that rule. So approaching them with that information seems to be a little bit more effective than just saying, you shouldn't be here because there's a rule against it, You shouldn't be here because here's the effects that you're having on the wildlife.
Yeah, and from an ambassador perspective, the people who are on the trail as ambassadors, they're not the police. They're not going to turn people in. They're not supposed to be in any way law enforcement. They're just there for the education side. And they are encouraged just to say, I'm not going to ask you to turn around, but do you know that? And with the hopes that these people will change their mind. And overall, people have been very positive. Out of the 1,000 people we've interacted with, almost 90% of them have been very positive or good-natured in general, and very few people have taken a sort of nasty, like Phil said, I've been hiking this trail for 20 years attitude towards the people that are manning these trails. But I can say that in the spring of last year, so the closure from April 15th to June 20th, we did see about 30 people on the closed trails. And since November, the winter closure, at least we have seen absolutely nobody. So that's good news. Yeah, or it could be colder. There's many factors that could have been, but we just like to know that that stat is going down a little bit.
And I guess the only thing I'd add is, since I've been in law enforcement for 35 years, is be very cautious, because probably the easiest way to elevate somebody is to say something bad about their kids or their dog. And none of this is worth, getting in a confrontation about. So if anything starts to elevate, please just turn your back and walk away. None of it's worth it. If there really is a large violation out there that you think, there's resource damage, you've seen something that really is illegal, a photo from your phone or something is probably the ultimate, but please don't approach these people.
And so just to clarify, we've gotten a few questions, comments about Burlemont and or the East Vail bighorn sheep. And while obviously there is a very broad discussion that needs to be had about those specific areas, right now they are not affected by any seasonal closure. So I will get back to you guys regarding those questions and or comments, but we really want to focus kind of on the closed areas that already exist, and maybe in the future, either of those parcels, depending on what happens there, will have seasonal closures on them, and we can get more specific about them. But I kind of wanted to make that contextually apparent, so you didn't think I was ignoring those questions or comments. So, folks, what would be best case management scenario in the context of using wildlife closures, seasonal closures? What would be the best case scenario using seasonal closures to bring back elk, deer populations to Eagle Valley? Is it possible with the few tools left in that kind of land management toolbox?
I don't-
Anybody?
Let me get some positive news. We did our winter counts in January out of a helicopter, as we do every year for the deer and elk. And we counted the highest number of animals in the valley here since we have in 2011. We've also seen the reproduction reach levels at least into the 40s, which means they're sustaining their population. They're no longer going to be declining, hopefully, unless the winter continues to be bad, and then we'll probably go on the decline again. But what I am saying, I guess, it is whatever we're doing and what we've kind of been put in place, even in the last couple of years, seems to be having some positive impacts. The closures, more people out there trying to enforce the closures. I think all of it's a very positive step. We're also seeing some very progressive things occur, especially like on the Hardscrabble Mountain, is it Hardscrabble Mountain Ranch?
Yeah, we made it really difficult. It's Brush Creek Valley Ranch and Open Space.
But it's gorgeous.
Yeah, what Phil said. We had open houses on that. User groups were present. I explained that for the first time ever, I was seeing elk calving occur down on the property. And I said, what we really would like to do is close it all the way till the elk calving is done. And those groups all climbed right on board once they had the information. And along with that, I put the caveat on there, if the elk stop using it, it's time to reconsider and get it back open to recreation. And I think we have to really start looking at that type of management if we want to see the people and the animals both thrive.
Do you have said anything about mountain lions or coyotes?
So I can, so mountain lions, coyotes, again, another, very important piece of that wildlife discussion. Anything that I'm aware of, there are trail closures when there is a carcass that may be, being returned to feed on. And you guys might, are there closures for predatory animals?
Predatory animals usually have these huge home ranges. I mean, a lion will go 75 square miles. So if you're going to close a trail, you're going to close everything. So we don't really have anything like that. It's usually more of an instance like was just discussed, where there is a fresh kill and people don't want to be around it. And actually, the closures can really be fairly short-lived. An animal takes care of the carcass really quickly.
Well, and I think for some of the open spaces that you see that are, very urban interfaced, like we posted some video of a mountain lion going through the closed area of Miller Ranch. And that's why some of these areas have specifically no public access or no human access to try to give in your more urban interface and environment specific corridors. Just to kind of go back to kind of what can we do, I think the open space program is in a unique place in terms of public comment, and that we do have a citizens advisory board. I've seen maybe one or two of you guys at the open space meetings, but when it comes to that fund and its use, we do have a unique tool in the valley or in the county to use those dollars in different ways that may be able to benefit wildlife. The planning for different public parcels, and it's a little bit more complicated for the Forest Service, a little bit more complicated than for us, is actually planning. One of the big things in natural resources right now is looking at carrying capacities or designing different recreational opportunities with some bumpers in terms of how many users that property will see. And so that's something that we can look at and might, when you build a parking lot for fishing that only has 4 cars and there's no parking on the street, well, that kind of limits who can and how many people can go out there. So some of those tools exist, but they're not always the most popular ones. The last piece, I think, that we have a tool with specifically for the county, and whether you are a fan of them or not, in terms of the program's history, are conservation easements on private land. And that is something that, in terms of a tool that can be positive for wildlife, I think the private land, not even interacting with the county program, but the way private land is managed, can really have an effect. Some of the bigger ranches in the county are some of the last places that those big herds hang out in. And with some of the opportunities, especially with our fund going through 2040, if there are specific wildlife or reasons for us to invest in a conservation easement that keeps a certain area from being developed or changing its use from something like a ranch, or if it's just a big open space, those might not always have public access. And that's where, that's not very popular, as you can imagine, to spend public money on something that people can't access. However, it's been done in the past. It's done all over the state at different open space outfits. And it's important for the public to be involved in that conversation when those properties or those projects come up.
So I think we got, time before we kind of get to our closing statements. One question from the audience. Anyone want to, anything? Yes, sir.
Just one question. So you mentioned parking. Have you had any success or even considered closing the parking, the trailheads parking? In many cases, people are driving to these. Obviously, there's some situations where you can walk from the neighborhood, but do you think that would be a successful endeavor to block the parking so people can't get onto the trails?
So the question was, has there ever been, have we ever utilized kind of blocking off parking spaces or really limiting parking options at these different trailheads, open space parcels to manage the number of people on the trails or in the area? Or the closures?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to do that because, as you saw on the maps, so many of those parking trailheads correlate with places that are open and closed. Like they're within, I think that's true. I don't know what you guys would say.
Yeah, for our land, a lot of that is the case. And a lot of the parking areas are not on our jurisdiction. Like I mentioned, it's kind of on town land, so we'd have to work with the towns on that. But it's a good thought and something we could put some time into.
Alrighty. Oh, yes, sir.
Hey, as far as tools, and I'm curious what your all's opinion is on sort of a pay-to-play model for recreational users, because as Mike mentioned, recreational use is only going to increase, and how do we manage that? And funding is always a challenge for many of you all sitting up there, and what your opinion is on pay-to-play and how that might be able to fund programs or tools to help support seasonal closures or just management of wildlife and the increased recreational impact that we're having in the state.
It's a great question. So the question was, has there been any thought of a pay-to-play type scheme to fund these different management activities? And I take it pay-to-play meaning a hiking tag, a biking tag, similar to a hunting permit is kind of what you're referring to.
I think those discussions are being had at the state level with the Luis Benitez and the State Tourism Office. So we're all ears, I would say.
And, this is, Citizen Peter talking. As a hiker, I would support that, fully. I think, I would buy it. If it would attach to my hiking boots, yes, please. But, I think that's a great idea from someone who doesn't pay hunting licenses, fishing licenses. I don't do those activities, but I use a lot of public lands. And so my personal, I would support that tenfold.
And we've considered that for quite a few years, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. When you're talking about groups paying to play, most of those groups want to see the money go back to improving or building more of what they're paying to play on. So in the discussions we've had, at least, it's how do you divert the funds to what you want to divert them to, like a certain percentage goes to trails and a certain percentage goes to wildlife. And I think the discussions are definitely being had, but I think that's where the real kind of stumbling block has been, for at least from our agency trying to push things.
And if you've been up to, I think a good example of this is up at Sylvan Lake State Park, where you have a lot of Forest Service and state The state park charges, pay to play to go on their trail systems. Forest Service is not. So you have to ask yourself, are you just funneling people to different areas that don't charge? Is that what you want? Do you have the more pristine areas or areas you want to try to see lower use numbers and use that as a management tool? But I think the hard thing, and I do think we look at the state for leadership in that conversation, that one of the biggest concerns, and I know with some of our transferring of our boat ramp properties to different field offices, both BLM, different ideas on the amount of users, and also trying not to price certain people out of recreation. If you have a $6,000 bike, you can probably pay for a tag, but a lot of people throughout the state, in different areas as well, we see a lot of users. I'm from Fremont County, not a lot of users except for a handful of locals down there, and a much different economic model than you have in the high country. So I see there being a little bit more potential on the local level until the state maybe decides on something. But there have been a few conversations at this point. I think there's going to be something in the pipeline at some point.
On a local level, the Vail Pass Winter Recreation Area is a great example of where that exists. So you pay $6 for a day pass or $40 for a season pass, and the way that works within our agency is all that, or 95% of that money goes back into that program, which is kind of hitting on Craig's point. Getting there is a challenge, or can be a challenge. Phil mentioned some of the processes we have to go through. That's definitely an issue. And again, it's kind of pricing people out, and also double charging is some of the concerns that we hear, because we already pay taxes, so why should we have to pay to use our public lands? But you get an increased services, so there's benefit for sure.
So folks, for the sake of time, maybe Phil, we can start down kind of with you. And as a community of recreators, what can we do to support, an easy takeaway, what can we do to support local wildlife populations? One lasting message for our audience, for our community, what can we do?
I think one of the biggest things I've mentioned a couple times is participation. You guys are here, so you're participating in the conversation. But working for a public entity, comments are huge. One of the things, whenever I have somebody stop and they have a big opinion on the use on one of our properties, I say, please get that to me in writing. Shoot me an email, let somebody know in writing, because it's a lot harder for us to give electeds, give leadership, different opinions from people if we don't have something to hand them. The other thing is just going to those meetings and that public comment. I think for the $4.7 million a year that the Open Space Fund, on average, picks up each year, we get comment from trail users, and that's about it, which is great, because then we have some input when it comes to opinions and planning. But I definitely think from, Town of Eagle controls a lot of the access to BLM up there. They get a lot of comments when it comes to their trailheads. It's great that they have that involvement. So not only just being involved, but as we touched on earlier, just deciding, for yourself, am I going to be one of those people that decides I'm going to go ahead and not head down that trail or head down that area. All of the people that come to this area really look left and right. Everybody who wants to hang out at Vail for a season, they're looking at the people in this community for an example of where they should be going and what they should be doing. So I think that education piece, but really kind of leading by example is the easiest one to do.
And just to point out, I've got contact information though, so Phil mentioned, comments, reach out, get it in writing. I've got their contact information on the board behind you guys, cycling through, so please take the opportunity to jot it down. I can also get you in touch with everybody that's up here tonight. Great.
I guess my suggestion would be, next time you're sitting around, I want to kill a conversation or a cocktail party, and you want to alienate your friends, bring up the reasons why we have the closures, and explain, we love the wildlife, and in order to maintain it, or in order to keep the diversity of wildlife we have to take these acts of closures or whatever other management practices we need. The population of Colorado isn't going to decline. This area's population isn't going to decline. I don't think the popularity of our trail systems and the beauty of this area is going to decline. I think we're just going to continue to see this basically exponential growth and use of the outside. And I think the only way you can get it is through a grassroots venture of talking to your friends, explaining, maybe go out and show them the wildlife instead of, going on a hike. Go find the elk, which are getting harder to find, or go look at the deer, or go look at the sheep, or we hate to make some of these areas accessible and available to the public, like peregrine sites, because every time we do, it becomes kind of a spectacle, and sometimes that causes the disturbance we're exactly trying to avoid. We've done the same thing with sage-grouse selections. We used to take tours out to watch the sage-grouse strut. Now they're not doing well, so now we hide that like it's the country U.S. secret. So we need to get people back involved and loving the wildlife. And if you love the wildlife, you want to do the right thing. So I think it's just a matter of putting the word out there. And I don't think there's any magic to this. And I think the government agencies also have to get a little more flexible. I know the federal agencies and the state have been basically, we put something on paper and it's good for 25 years. Well, 25 years is not a good time frame anymore. Things change in 2 or 3 years anymore. So we have to figure out a way to build in the flexibility and the adaptability to change quickly. And I guess if you can put that word in your congressman's ears, in your representatives' ears, it wouldn't hurt.
Michelle.
Oh, I can't say enough about the ambassador program. It was born with a lot of thought and consideration. The U.S. Forest Service and VVMTA created this program. It's like Peter said, grassroots. A lot of we know how much of an impact it can have. Just to help you guys understand, don't feel like, I just don't want anyone to be in here and think, I'm only one person, what can I do? It's incredible what one person can do, because it can take off from there. But if you have time, if you wanted to give a little bit of that time back to your community, to the wildlife, the ambassador program is a great option for you. We have 2 kinds of ambassadors. We have field ambassadors, the people like this woman who's standing at a trailhead. We also have what's called social ambassadors. These are people that go to the community, to the places that recommend places to go, like the hotels or the bike shops. We're trying to educate those people on, do you know while the trails are closed? And so we have these 2 kinds of people that are circulating in our valley, and we have hundreds of hours of volunteer time already. And like I said, thousands of people have been informed, and you guys can be somebody like that can help us educate the community. I do have a training that's going to be aired on High Five Media. Actually, it's available on High Five Media at all times. If you were interested in just seeing what the program's about, it's a 1-hour seminar, and I can send that to any of you. I'm also going to have it aired on, I think it's Thursday the 11th of April at 6:30, and that's going to be available as a training. If enough people are interested, I always do it on a yearly basis, April through April, so if you're interested in becoming involved before April, just let me know. And if enough people are interested, I would do a live seminar instead of just the digital one. But please reach out to me or grab a flyer at the back if you just want more information.
Mike, I'll echo what Phil said. I think it's important to really stay involved. The Forest Service is a public service agency, so anything we do, we allow opportunity for comments and public participation. So again, like you said, a lot of times it's trail users who are out there are coming to us and being engaged, and we see less of other types of interest. Not always, but that's a lot of the case. So spread the word and try to stay as involved as you can. There's a website you can go to that has all of our projects on there, and how you can comment, how you can be involved in your local public land. So I agree with that.
So, kind of the common theme that, I at least heard from the folks up here, and I hope you guys heard as well, is that involvement. That it's got to come. These guys are here to listen. They're here to make changes. They can't do it on their own. It's got to come from us. So I want to thank all of you guys for being a part of the conversation tonight and to really get the ball rolling. I mean, there's going to be a presentation in Vail in the coming weeks. We're going to host a very almost the exact same presentation with a couple different panelists a month from now down at Gypsum at the Mountain Rec Fieldhouse. So we're trying to reach everybody. We want people to stay engaged. We want to keep wildlife on the tip of everyone's tongue because like everyone said, we want to make sure that our wildlife populations are here, they're healthy, and sustainable. So thank you to all my panelists this evening. Thank you guys all for coming, and check out the presentation on Hi-Fi Media soon.